What's going on, guys? My name is Arrow, and in today's video, we are talking about my latest creation, Self-Cast Glacial Cascade Elementalist, and it rocks. Let's get into it. So the tech in this build isn't necessarily groundbreaking, but we are approaching power charge stacking from a slightly different angle. The reason that we're using Elementalist is because Heat Shiver gives us cold as extra fire, and if you get enough chance to freeze and chance to chill, and you have big effect of both of those on the enemy, you end up getting about half of your damage being fire. Mastermind of Discord gives you huge negative resistances for enemies that are affected by your exposure. On top of that, we get Convergence, which is massive damage, and then AoE when we're not hitting unique enemies. And we steal Forbidden Power to get that power charge and area of effect scaling from the Occultist. We get 4 Golems, which are super strong for just general build quality of life. And what results is a really strong build overall. I was able to put some currency into this one, more than I usually spend on a build, but I was having a lot of fun. We went and got some Onslaught Tailwind Elusive Boots. We kind of unnecessarily elevated a few stats here and there and made it a little bit stronger. But those things are not necessary to get the build to function. They just make it feel really nice. I am halfway to level 98. I'm easily leveling with this build. The only thing that ever kills me is when I take too many altar nodes that give negative resistance. So I get my personal res down into the negative 20, 30, 40. And then I put Fizz as extra fire on monsters and I take a couple of hits and you just die. The reality is, if you are smart with your altars, which I know is not very fun, but if you're smart with your altars, you're never going to die in this build, at least while mapping. The freeze and freeze prolift make sure that everything on the screen is frozen, and I mean everything, because our hits are massive. We get full chill effect and freeze on bosses like the Eater and the Exarch, so we always get that massive damage, and we're able to take down bosses really quickly. Overall, I would highly recommend this build to anyone who's looking for that self-cast freeze sort of playstyle, which happens to be my personal favorite. I love running through a map and just shattering everything as I go, and the MTX on this build is going to get its own section. It's that good. So let's dive into the gear, talk about how the build functions, and get you playing as soon as you can. So let's dive into the gear, talk about how the build functions, all the items that you're going to need, and get you playing this build as soon as we can. Okay, so here we have my level 97 Golementalist with all of my 4 buddies that I have here that provide lots of interesting buffs. Let's talk about the gear. Void Battery, one of my favorite items in the entire game. These things are phenomenal. I put an okay tree on it. I did a bunch of these and I got some spell crit, a little bit of cold damage, and then stealing charges doesn't matter, and it's got 14 AoE while you've killed recently. So nothing too special in this tree. This is the tier 3 roll, I think. So it's actually pretty bad. You could do much better than this. And then on the other side, if you want to get more damage, you can use 2 void batteries, but I want to go for a shield here. It is a +1 power charge shield. We rolled essences for a crit chance to get spell suppression. We got tier 2 spell suppress and hit tier 1 lightning res, so we kept that. And then I think I locked in reforged life. I don't actually remember how I got this, to be honest. But this is just like a pretty good shield. This is nothing crazy here. You don't need to go for these rolls necessarily, but crit chance is a nice essence to try to craft the things that you want. But we do have a decent amount of ES on here, which is great because our life pool is pretty big, 4,400 life and 1,200 ES. Next, Badge of the Brotherhood. Another one of my favorite items. This makes it so your maximum frenzy charges are equal to your maximum power charges. We have 10 power charges, therefore we also have 10 max frenzy charges. The problem is you have to find a way to generate those frenzy charges, which we'll get into next. Another nice thing about the Badge of the Brotherhood is increased CDR of travel skills per frenzy charge. That makes it so your flame dash is just about always available. You don't need to use shield charge if you go for Badge of the Brotherhood, in my opinion, because you have so much access to movement with this stat. That is 100% CDR on flame dash. You can also use this on Frostblink and it feels pretty good, but I prefer the charges that you get with flame dash. Next, a massive defensive boost is increased effect of elusive on you per power charge. So elusive gives you a chance to avoid being damaged by hits, which is phenomenal defense. If you get hit and don't take damage, well, then you pretty much didn't get hit, right? This also gives us some movement speed. So how do we get frenzy charges? Well, you got to craft a frenzy charge on hit chest. I decided to go a little bit over the top on this one. What you really want is frenzy on hit, spell crit, and additional curse. And that's a very easy chest to make. There's 1,000 guides online on how to make it, but I wanted to go elevated because you get more movement speed and some more crit. So I merged the elevated frenzy charge and elevated crit, and I got very lucky and I hit fire res. And then I locked and hit additional curse on a reforge caster. It's guaranteed when you lock these suffixes and you reforge caster on the prefix to hit an additional curse with this chest. So then we slammed on a % evasion and that's fine. And then we got fizz taken as fire and lightning as our craft. You don't want to hit life if you can help it. Then you can get 15% life on the tree from the mastery if your chest doesn't have life on it. So we've got this fizz taken as, we have that in a few other places like the Taste of Hate. So our fizz mitigation is actually okay. Usually on evasion builds, at least my evasion builds, fizz mitigation is kind of iffy, but we have a good amount of it. On our boots, these boots are absolutely insane. I paid 28 divines for these. It's got elusive on crit. It's got move speed and move speed if you haven't been hit recently. Life, elevated tailwind, onslaught on kill, elevated onslaught, and then a res. It's also got the chaos res implicit. You can get a much cheaper version of these exact boots that maybe don't have a res, don't have a good implicit, don't have an enchant. Probably spend somewhere between 10 and 15 divines. But like I said, I have some money this league at this point, and I'm kind of getting bored of making really cheap builds. So we decided to splurge a little bit. And these boots make you so fast. You have to get elusive on your boots in order to make this build work, because Badge of the Brotherhood gives you all this elusive effect, very strong. But you don't need Tailwind and Onslaught. You can get Onslaught on a Flask, which I actually have. Basically, we just was using it for bossing, but I never took it off because I was lazy. You can put something else interesting in the slot, maybe a life flask. I swapped a life flask out. I used it for a while and just found that I never really needed it. So I would say this flask slot, you're going to want the reduced curse effect, but you don't need the onslaught implicit if you have these boots. Belt, I've been doing this all league. I buy belts that have good suffixes, decent suffixes, life, and then an open prefix, and I slam it with a Hunter Exalted Orb. I've got like 20 of these in my inventory. This one I happen to hit % life on, so life and mana modifier catalysts on it make it very strong. But the reality is I think I paid 1.5 divines for the base and then a Hunter Exalted Orb, and now we have this awesome belt. For the gloves, the implicit is very important. You need to get fire exposure. We get cold exposure from a cluster jewel. You have to get exposure because the Elementalist Ascendancy node that gives you extra penetration requires you to have exposure. Because we are using Heat Shiver, we need both cold and fire exposure. Next, I went for a very high level of freezes that you inflict spread to other enemies. This is quality of life. It freezes everything on the screen, sometimes chains between packs. It's so strong. When everything's frozen, they can't hurt you. I have a video that I made earlier this league talking about how freeze is the best defense, and I truly believe that. Getting big freeze prolif means you're just going to be freezing everything all the time. So for the rest of this, I needed spell suppress, some dex, some life, some res. Nothing too exciting. The Heat Shiver, a +1 power charge Heat Shiver is actually not that expensive. I got one with this enchant on it for a couple of divines. I think it was 3. You don't need Hatred. You can get Grace, Mana Reservation Efficiency, or you can move some reservation around and get it elsewhere. I found this to be just the easiest way to get it because it was pretty cheap. But +1 power charge and then Heat Shiver. Gain 1% of cold as extra fire per chill effect. We have 30 chill effect on all enemies in the game, including the endgame bosses, the pinnacles. Probably not on Ubers, but as you know, I didn't play those. Then you gain 100% of cold as extra fire against frozen enemies. We are also freezing all enemies, including the pinnacles. Our hits are over 1,000,000 damage once we have our charges up, and 1,000,000 hit on a pinnacle is going to freeze it. They'll still be able to move around, but they will get frozen. Pinnacle bosses have a sort of immunity to freeze that allows you to freeze them for the effects of freeze that you get from things like Heat Shiver, but it doesn't actually stop their movement. The rings, you can do a lot of things here. This is basically just solving some problems. The recoup is nice to have. You need the minus mana cost and then life, res, strength. On this side, I bought this ring actually for I think 5 divines. It's got an elemental weakness implicit. You can try to get that elsewhere, but I thought it was easy to get this way. Multi, some res, life, and again, minus cost. We'll go over the flask real quick. We already talked about the Onslaught flask being not necessary, but we have an evasion flask. This allows us to get very, very high evasion rating. A sulfur flask is just kind of like nice to have a little bit of extra damage and a little bit of extra regen. This is not necessary, but the suffix of reduced mana cost is pretty important. You don't absolutely need it, but when you're casting over and over again, your mana can get kind of low if you stand still and cast, so I recommend getting this suffix somewhere. Movement speed flask just has more movement speed, and then Taste of Hate. This is massive. Get a perfect roll if you can afford it, but Fizz Taken is cold, and then Fizz is extra cold, both super strong for this build. Okay, let's talk about the gems. In our wand, we have a cast when damage taken, Immortal Call. This is pretty standard. We don't always have endurance charges to expend, so we're only just using it just to get a little bit less damage taken. Also, this is more tech that I have been using a lot this league, and a little spoiler as to what my next build might be. Void Sphere. Void Sphere is wonderful. If you have a level 1 on a low level cast when damage taken, you basically every once in a while are throwing a Void Sphere out that sucks all the enemies on the screen into one grouping, and then you can hit them all with one spell. And it's very, very powerful, not just for this build, but any AoE sort of spell or attack that allows you to do damage on chunks of enemies. It pulls them all together, makes them slow, makes them not able to hit you, and is really strong against things like the Crucible mechanic, where in a map, all those monsters open up at once. As soon as one hits you, you take some damage, it pops the Void Sphere out and pulls them all together, and then you can just take them out before they can even run to you. In the helmet, we are running a level 4 Enlighten. Unfortunately, I hate doing that, but it just needed to be the case, and again, I wanted to spend some money on the build. So we have Grace, Hatred, and Herald of Ice here, nothing special. We have Assassin's Mark on Arcanist brand. I hate self-casting marks, so I always put them on a brand, so I can put the brand on the ground before the boss spawns in, and then when the boss spawns in, the brand will attach to the boss and cast the mark. Portal, and then we have Flame Dash here, as well as a 3-link Vortex, which has Arcane Surge and Divergent Bone Chill. This makes it so we have increased chill effect on our enemies, and then enemies that are chilled by us take more cold damage. This is a really, really nice boost, and because we are always getting max chill on every enemy in the game, as long as they're hit by your Vortex, which is gigantic, then they will take more cold damage. In our gloves, we have all 4 of our golems. Getting Anomalous is very important because you get increased buff effect. And there's actually a div card that gives golems with 2123 on them. So these were very, very cheap. It wasn't even more expensive to get 2123 for some of them. But the reason I don't have the reason I don't have it on some of them is because the strength requirement was actually a little bit too high. And I think I only had enough strength for level 20. If you get a little bit more strength, again, I think I have 30 on this ring. You get a little bit more, you can get 2123s. But we use a Stone Golem for huge life regen. Flame Golem is just damage. Lightning Golem gives us cast speed. And then the Chaos Golem gives us a bunch of physical damage reduction on top of all the Fizz Taken as that we have. This build feels pretty good against Fizz. Okay, the Ascendancy. So the Golemancer stuff is pretty self-explanatory. This gives us increased effective buffs, allows our golems to be resummoned, which is the biggest problem with having them in a build, is resummoning them is annoying. These make it so they always resummon. They don't die very often, but every once in a while they will, and then they'll be resummoned. Get another max golem here, and it makes them so they don't take elemental damage. That's huge. Over here, massive damage. We regen mana and also get an extra 25% exposure for fire and cold. And then Heart of Destruction, one of the best nodes in the entire game. Convergence when you hit a unique enemy. That means we get 30% more damage for 4 seconds, which is enough to kill just about anything in the game that isn't an Uber. And then once that goes down, we have 60% increased area of effect, which for our Glacial Cascade is massive. The reason that's so powerful is Glacial Cascade can actually overlap its hits. It sends out 4 waves, and the last one is the biggest wave. If you have as much AoE as I have, you can actually overlap 3 of the waves with good positioning. That's why you see me always trying to move around a little bit on single target to try to get that perfect position to get 3 overlaps. So the damage that you see in PoE is almost double. We'll talk about our 5th Ascendancy node, that is Forbidden Power. That gives us increased AoE, gives us increased damage, and +1 power charge. I think I spent somewhere around 15 divines for these. They can be kind of expensive, but definitely worth it. So on the tree, some interesting things we go for. We get a Lethal Pride here. Things like double damage, some increased life, a little more double damage here, and then a bunch of strength, which helps solve our strength problem. We're obviously stacking power charges, so we take all the power charge stuff here. We anoint this one and take this one here. One of the most important things in the entire game is getting 25% chance to open nearby chests when you cast a spell. So then you never have to open any chests. It is delightful. Mandatory if you're playing a spellcaster, in my opinion. And this is a pretty good wheel to get it on. This node is new as of 3.21 Crucible League. It gives you increased effective chill on the way, which helps you get to 30% on all enemies. And then enemies permanently take 1% increased damage for each second that they've ever been chilled by you. Not recently, ever, up to 10%. That's a good amount of damage, 10% increased damage taken. And then the Cold Mastery gives you 5% increased damage taken for each second they've ever been frozen by you, up to 50. So if you're fighting a boss and you've been fighting them for 10 seconds and you've had them frozen and chilled for 10 seconds, they take 60% increased damage. That is a massive multiplier. In the PoB, I have it ticked for 1 second each, because obviously you'll fight just about everything for at least 1 second. But you can up the damage on that and see how crazy it gets. And you can see when I fight bosses how the damage tends to ramp. As I get my power charges and frenzy charges, the damage goes up. And then after a few seconds, this node is really active and the damage goes through the ceiling. We get some spell suppression where we can. We have Ghost Dance, which is great for our energy shield. And then we have a Unnatural Instinct here. I've been using this jewel a lot more lately because it's super cheap. For us, this is a phenomenal jewel socket. So you wouldn't want to take this frenzy charge, right? Because we don't need max frenzy charges. We have Badge of the Brotherhood. But this is a really good node. That's 40% increased evasion. So that's one of the things that we get from this jewel. We get evasion rating, evasion per frenzy, 12% max life, 8 all res, 40 dexterity, and 50 increased critical strike chance for 3 points. Highly recommend taking this on this sort of build. For our clusters, we go for Corrosive Elements here to get cold exposure. Inspired Oppression gives us a bunch of mana regen. Because we can't leech mana as a spell, you need to get mana regen. And we're always freezing and shocking. The Lightning Golem gives us an aura that gives us lightning damage, so we're always giving little shocks on enemies. We even shocked the Exarch. In the fight, you can see that most of the time he has a 4% shock on him, which is enough to give you more mana regen. And we use, on this side, Inspired Oppression and Doriani's. This gives us leech. You can get leech on your gloves, but I dropped it for the fire exposure. And then our medium clusters, Towering Threat, Assert Dominance. This is just huge AoE and life. We have 2 more of them here. Vast Power, you want to get 1 of these. That's 30% AoE. Another Towering Threat for life. And then we got a Magnifier here for a little bit of damage. We have a really nice life pool. And that's going to do it for this build. This was an absolute blast to play. I didn't want to put it down. I did so many maps on this build, and it really scratched that itch for me of doing big crits, big shatters, screen freezes. I absolutely love this playstyle. You cannot beat it in PoE. If you have any questions, come on over to my Twitch, twitch.tv/AER0__, or you can join my Discord, link below. Check out my Patreon if you want to support me financially. I would appreciate that very much. If not, you can just like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. I appreciate you all so much. Thank you for hanging out. Thank you for watching the video. And as always, take care.